Guys, welcome back to another eye tutorial. This is another tutorial from my mini YouTube series which I'm making, and I'm doing real-time versions for patrons. So this week we are going to be drawing a tiger's eye. I've used a free reference picture from Pixabay from this one, which I have included in the description of the video, as well as the description on the actual post as well. So all I've done is just sketched out the eye. I have opted to go for the right eye this time because in the previous one I did the left eye of the blue cat's eye. So we've gone for the right eye of the tiger. I also think it has a bit of a nicer reflection to try and recreate, and it just appealed to me more than the left, so that's the reason why I've gone with the right eye on this one. I'm going to use a mixture of luminance, polychromos, and I'm actually going to use some Prismacolors as well. And I'm also going to dabble a little bit with the solvent blender. So I'm using my Zest-it blending sponge and citrus blending solution for a little bit on this eye. It's just so I can get a really glassy look. I may not use it, but it's there just in case I do. The other tools I'm using are the main ones that I use. I'm using the Tombow eraser, the monoplastic eraser, the little round one. I have a little paintbrush here to use with the solvent blender. I've got my usual Caran d'Ache triangular eraser as well and my drawing broom. So let's get started and get straight into drawing this eye. So the first thing that I'm going to do is outline the iris and the pupil. So I'm going to use a dark sepia pencil, and I'm not going to bother erasing my graphite for this one. I'm just going to go directly around the outside, just outline it so we can get the shape down. So all around the outside of this. I'm also going to outline the top of the fur as well. So where the black just above the eye is quite like a hooded eyelid, I'm going to outline that with some black as well, some dark sepia, sorry. So we're just going to go all around the black parts that we can see in the eye with the dark sepia and just get that roughly sketched in. I'm also using the Strathmore Bristol Board 500 series plate for this tutorial, as I used it for the previous cat's eye as well. So I just thought I would keep everything nice and cohesive using the same surface, apart from the one that I used for the dog's eye because that was on an actual pet portrait. So we need to make sure we get all of this in, so just get it nice and sketched in. I'm going to outline the pupil as well, and what we're going to do is just gently shade that pupil in as well. Just cover the surface so it's nice and dark. And then we're also going to do this for the top sections of the eye. So we're going to shade all of this top bit in. And then we're going to come around the side as well. And we're just going to start to define. There's some little bumpy marks within the eye itself, so we're just going to slightly add those in and start to suggest that there's some sort of pattern and texture there. And then we're just going to shade around. And then we're going to come underneath the eye as well. side. Just joining all of this dark. I'm not really trying to shade in any particular direction. I'm just sort of just shading generally all over, just to try and get a nice coverage. And I'm using a combination of circular motions with my pencil to try and cover as much of the paper as possible, as well as using some back and forth strokes. So I'm going all the way up to where I've outlined a little highlight there. I don't want to go over the little highlight bit just yet. But all of this down here is really quite dark. So I'm just trying to add a general ring around the outside of the eye first. Okay, I'm going to leave this section till later, and what we're going to do is just layer some dark indigo on top of that dark sepia. So we're going to layer this all over what we've just added, and you can see that it will start to darken it up, start to add a little bit of tone as well. So again, trying to just use some simple strokes, not really worrying about where any of the pencil direction is going. Just trying to get a nice, smooth, even coverage with each layer to build up the darks. And then what we're going to do is go over that again with the dark sepia, so it's a little bit of a laborious process at the moment. So start to really darken that up now. And if you need to, you can increase the pressure on your pencil as you build up the layers. Okay, so we also need to add the indigo, dark indigo, to the pupil. So for this I'm using circular strokes, and I'm trying to just make sure that I don't add any of this colour into the highlight there, but I am picking out bits of the highlight where you can see darker shapes and reflections of buildings. And then I'm just going to go over that with the dark sepia and try and make those lines quite crisp where that highlight's sitting. And you can see you get it quite nice and dark as well. So the next thing that I'm going to do is start to add the highlights around the eye. So I'm just going to gently erase the graphite lines which I've just laid down for those, ever so slightly. And I'm going to put a layer down of the warm grey 3 just in those highlight areas. So I'm picking out the shapes of the little waterline, like reflection mark. I call it a highlight area, but it's like a little water line you can see running through the tiger's eye, where it's nice and reflective and nice and wet. I'm just adding a little layer of this down to suggest that, and then I'm going to go over that just very, very lightly with some genuine cobalt blue from the Luminance. And that's just so we get the distinction between that's the highlight or water line and not just some random grey area. So what we can do after that is just continue with adding the dark all around. So we're going to put our layer down of dark sepia. So with this one we want to go right up to the edge of the water highlighty area that we've just added with the Warm Grey 3 and the blue, and making sure that we go all around it. And we're going to add all of this dark section in now. And we're going to do exactly the same for this part. I'm going to go around that little highlight section. There's two little highlight sections there, so we're going to go around them both. And then all we're going to do is just colour all of this section in with the dark sepia, followed by the dark indigo, and then followed by dark sepia again. So I'm just going to speed this little section up so that you can follow on quite quickly. Okay, so I've added all of my dark base down, and I will actually use the Zest-it blender just to smooth all of this area out, just so it's nice and smooth. It's going to take me a while to build up the layers and burnish, so it's just easier if I just use the Zest-it pencil blend to just blend this out. And it's been a while since I've used a pencil blend anyway, and the last time I did a tiger's eye I think I used the same technique and it turned out quite nice. So I've just dabbed a little bit on my sponge and then put a little bit on my paintbrush, and then it's quite a dry paintbrush. It's not too wet and it's not too dry, and I'm just going to gently blend these colours together. So just gently blending away. The technique that I use for using the pencil blender is generally just small strokes, and I try and keep them quite circular because then that spreads the pigment around quite nicely and it doesn't leave it looking too grainy. So I just need to pick it a little bit more up on my paintbrush. And you can see it started to make it look quite smooth, and then this will help with further layers of dark colour because I need to add quite a few layers over the top. So this will just help blend it all together. It will help smooth out the surface of the paper so it's quite easy to add subsequent layers, and I won't damage the tooth of the paper so much. So I'm just going around the whole of the eye. Just blending out, making sure that I keep my paintbrush not too wet but then not too dry. I want to keep a nice amount loaded onto my paintbrush at all times. This is a nice thing about the Bristol board, is that it can handle a nice amount of any sort of liquid blender, and it does smooth out really nicely, especially on this plate surface. So I'm making sure that I go around those little highlighty areas. If you don't have the Zest-it pencil blend, you can use any type of blender that you feel necessary. So you could even use some powder blender from Brush and Pencil if that's your preferred, or you could use a blender pen or any kind of blending that you feel necessary just to get a nice smooth even coverage. Now you can see that that's quite dark looking and the tone has built up quite nicely. I'm just going to blend in the pupil a little bit as well. Like that. And just pop the lid back on my Zest-it, and then what we're going to do is just wait for that to dry, and whilst we're waiting for that to dry we can start to build up some of the tones within the iris. So to start that, what we're going to do is just add some colour on the bottom half of the iris here. So we're going to start with a nice light layer of some ivory, and I'm going to go all the way up to this small line which I've just roughly penciled out just there. And that's where I have indicated that the colours change, because this tiger's eye goes from a nice orange and then transitions into a green as well. So adding down the ivory right up to the edge of the black. And then continuing that, just using small circular motions to just fill the tooth of the paper all the way up to that line. Then we're going to add the next layer, which is a raw umber 10% from the Luminance. This is just a nice grey kind of cream, and we're doing exactly the same. We're just using some circular motions, just building up the colour, going right up to the edge of that black, and then bringing the colour forward to meet that line which I've drawn. I'm trying to keep the tone nice and even. So I want to keep nice circular motions, keep the pressure even on the pencil all the way around the iris. And then we're going to build up some orange colour. So we're going to start by adding some brown ochre 10% from the Luminance. This is like a nice creamy colour, so we're just going to build up a small layer of this on top of that, on top of those previous two. And then we're going to slowly get darker, so we're going to use some of the brown ochre 50%. I'm going to use this lightly, and this will start the orange tone within the eye here. So you'll start to see it all coming together, and as we're doing this as well, the black around the outside is drying, so once we've added a few layers here, we can go back in and continue with the black colour on the outside of the eye. So we're just making sure that we add an even layer over, again using a combination of circular motions and back and forth motions to get as much coverage as we can across the paper. Just going to wipe away any pencil dust which is forming as well. And with this colour we're just going to continue ever so slightly up around the highlight. We're not going to add any base layer under this. This is because this top section is slightly darker than the bottom. I'm also just going to erase the highlight, and we're just going to pencil around the highlight, just redraw the shape back in with this colour. So we're going to make sure that we come all the way up and stop where the eye tends to get a lot darker. And the same on this side, we're going to come all the way up here so we can blend it nicely with the green and the darker colours which sit above the highlight there. So now we've got the basis for the orange, what I'm going to do is add the basis for the green around the eye as well. So for that, what I'm going to do is just gently erase the bottom half of the highlight, the graphite of the highlight there. And I'm going to use a light sort of greeny yellow colour to begin with. It's going to be the olive brown 10%. I'm just going to add this as a base layer on here, and then we're going to add the green, because the green isn't entirely like a solid really emeraldy green, it's more of a yellow green and then transitions again into a little bit of orange around the pupil there. So adding this base layer down, we're just adding the shape of the highlight back in as well. So just penciled that in, and then we're just adding the base layer all over and up to the pupil of the tiger's eye there. So once we've got that base layer down, we're going to slightly blend it into the orange so we can blend the two colours together. And then we're going to start to add some very, very light green colours in there. So I'm going to use the Cobalt Green from the Luminance, and then to add little darker greens I'm going to use a few colours and a selection of greens from the Prismacolors. So I'm just going to add this very, very lightly over our initial base layer. I'm going to make sure that I slightly blend this into the orange area which we've defined. And for this I'm using quite large circular motions with my pencil to try and get as much colour down as possible, but without pressing too hard. So this adds a nice fill of colour without it being too harsh. So we're just going to slightly blend this into the orange by adding small circular motions going over that line which I initially added with the graphite and where we built the orange up to. Then we're going to switch back to the orange quickly, and we're going to build and blend the orange into the green. So we're going to do exactly the same back over the green. So we're going to come from the orange and blend it into the green. And this is so we get a smooth transition between the colours, like that. Then what I'm going to do is just take this orange pencil and look at my reference and see where there are some orange parts around the pupil. So I'm going to add these in. I'm going to go in quite firm with my pencil to add these in as well. Just going to add these around the pupil like that. So we've got a nice basis there. Then what I'm going to do is just blend this out slightly just by using some light shading marks spiraling out from the pupil. There, there's the basis colour for the iris, and then we're just going to build upon that. But first what I'm going to do is make sure that this outer area is dark enough and get the highlights and everything in properly first. So what I'm going to use to go over this area is some dark indigo from the Polychromos. I'm also going to use my blue from the Luminance. I'm going to use some Delft blue and some mauve from the Polychromos as well. And of course I'm going to get out my white pencil. I'm going to use a combination of the Prismacolor white and the Luminance white for this as well. I'm also going to use a little bit of walnut brown and of course a dark sepia to really darken things up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start at the very top of the eye here. I need to make sure that my dark sepia pencil is really quite sharp. So I'm just going to sharpen it up a little bit. So I've got a nice sharp pencil, and then what I'm going to do is just layer quite heavily over the area which we've blended so we get a nice smooth tone. And then every now and then I'm also going to go in with the mauve and the Delft blue just to help add some depth to the black colour there. So I'm going to add some mauve there, and then as we get closer to the highlight sections I'm going to add the Delft blue. So I'm going to add that actually all over that little highlight section. I can always lighten it up. It's going to be much easier to lighten something as well if we add a little bit of the blender over the top. So what I'm going to do is just outline the very outer edge of the eye now, because this little bit here is actually brown, but we've added a nice dark basis which we can follow with some browns. So I'm going to make sure that this is nice and dark. I'm going to make sure that the dark blends into that highlighted section there. We're going to continue to add the mauve and the Delft blue. And then again we need to add some Delft blue over that. And we also need to darken it slightly, so we're going to get the form of that highlight and then we're going to darken it where necessary. So we're going to add a little bit of shape in there, and then if we need to we can pull out some highlights again, some lighter parts with the white pencils. So just pull out the highlight there and slightly shade around it where we need to. So all I'm going to do for the rest of this dark patch just down here up until we get to this highlight here, I'm just going to do exactly the same process, just going to layer a little bit of the mauve, Delft blue, dark indigo, and then cover it all with some dark sepia. So I'm going to fast forward through this section so it's easy for you to follow and you don't get bored just seeing me repeat the same process. Okay, so now I have darkened up this section nicely. What I'm going to do is just add a little bit of the fur around the outside of that so that we can start to see a realistic looking eye rather than just this weird general blobby shape that we've got going on at the moment. So all I'm going to do for this is put a base layer down of Warm Grape 1. So I'm just going around my graphite section and just adding in a layer of Warm Grey 1. I'm going in the direction that the hair is going as well, and I'm going all the way up to the black section of the eye. So we just need to erase some graphite out of here, just where I've picked out a few of the dark hairs and indicated where they need to go. Also just going to erase that graphite line and any surrounding lines around there. So then we're going to fill all of this in all the way up here. And we're just going to follow the way that these hairs lay across the eye, the top of the eye. So that's the base layer down. Then we're going to use the pencil that we used earlier for the base layer within the orange part of the iris, and that's the Raw Umber 10%. And with this we're just going to gently shade from the black. This is where the white fur is at its darkest. So I'm going to gently shade this to get it a little bit darker. And as we're shading out, we're trying to create tiny little hairs. So I'm trying to create the texture as we're going. So I'm starting to create some lines coming off of the black there, so that's where the hairs jut out. So I'm going to do this all over the eye here, and I'm also going to bring these hairs up to the very outer edge of our drawing. And I'm going to start to angle them in slightly different directions as well. And then we're going to take a warm grey 3, and we're going to do exactly the same. We're going to make sure that it's darker at the base here towards the black section of this eye. Mind as my cat walks all the way across my desk to try and get on the windowsill. And then we're going to pull out a few hairs. Some darker hairs. We're going to overlap them and crisscross them so that they look natural as well. And then what we're going to do is start to bring some of this darkness into the hair. So I'm going to use some cold grey 4, and we're going to come directly from the black and bring tiny little hairs and extend them into longer ones into the creamy area of the fur. So you need to make sure that it's really nice and dark. We also want to make sure that we follow the hair direction and that we make it look like the hair is coming around and going over, overlapping, and just generally looking like realistic fur. Okay, so then what we're going to do is take our darkest colour, so we're going to use our dark sepia, and we're going to pull some of these hairs directly from the black and transition them into the fur here, so we don't get such a harsh line, like a straight line. Underneath the fur there. So we're just adding in tiny little lines, making sure that we blend nicely into the fur here. Okay, some nice overlapping lines, and we're going to use medium pressure just to try and shade all of this together. I'm going to use my green colour just to add a little bit of shading into the fur here where it's a slightly different colour. I'm also going to use a light blue from the Prismacolor. So this one is just blue, it's PC904. And all I'm going to do is just add a light layer of this into the fur here. Just generally shading and then working in the direction of the fur and just adding some fur lines of this colour as well. So where necessary, I would also add some brown. So where I've got some really dark fur and you've got some little dark intersections here, I would just add a little base of brown to just add the shape of that. And then add slight pressure just to build the colour and to shade around it. And then I would go in with my darkest colour, so I'd use the dark sepia just to really define up that space and add that dark section in. Those hairs that are all overlapping there. And then add some other hairs just intermingling just to make it look natural. we can add some darker blue colours as we come further up. So I'm going to use the blue-violet Prismacolor just to add some slightly darker blue hairs as we come further up, and then blend them out with the dark sepia again. The hairs are quite, even though they're white, they're quite dark up here, just underneath here, where all of the hairs are overlapping and overlaying, and so we're just trying to define up all of this area. Just making it as dark as possible and adding in all the necessary hairs. So what we're going to do is do exactly the same all the way around the eye, top and bottom, just using the same process, and I'm going to speed this up again so it's easier for you guys to follow along. Okay, so I have gone around and added the fur. As you can see, I've added the white fur to the top and the bottom of the eye. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to shade up this highlight within the eye. So all that requires is some blue and a little bit of violet and a little bit of patience, really. So what I'm going to do is use the Prismacolor Blue Violet, and all I'm going to do is just shade over that section, just like that. And then I'm going to use the violet from the Prismacolor just to add a little bit of differentiation between tones. So it's quite close in tone to the blue violet. We're just adding a bit more tone there. So what I'm going to use for this is a Warm Grey 5. And all I'm going to do is just start to fill in the highlight and just blend it together, just very, very lightly, all over with the Warm Grey 5, so it starts to sink into the paper a little bit and it doesn't look quite so vibrant. And we're going to transition both ends like so. Then I'm going to take my dark sepia, and I'm just going to make sure that this end is the right length. Just shade it over a little bit. And the same with this one. Shade that over a little bit. Then what I'm going to do is just gently blend that together with some Zest-It pencil blend. I'm going to dab my paintbrush on my sponge and just gently blend all of this bit together. And then this will help when we add whites and some darker colours over the top. It will help get rid of that wax build-up. Like that. So all that we need to do is start to add some defining features within here. So I'm going to use my Polychromos black pencil, and I'm also going to use the Prismacolor white pencil. So with the black pencil, we just need to wait for this to dry just a little bit. But with the black pencil, what I'm going to do is just add in any of the dark features, any reflection which I can see in there, just add in all the necessary dark areas around the eye. I'm just darkening up the area around the highlight as well. So just gently shading some black over there. And then what I'm going to do is start to build the shapes and the dimension to that waterline area. So just looking at the reference photo, just seeing what's going on with the darker areas. There is a dark line which sort of runs all the way up through the centre, and then here and there bits are shaded either side. And then afterwards we're going to go over with some indigo and some Delft blue and just really make sure that the blue areas within this highlight are considerably blue. So go over with some Delft blue. I'm also going to use the genuine cobalt blue from the Luminance. Add those over, and also adding in some dark indigo, just shading some of the darker blue areas as well, blending them into the dark areas, and just constantly going over with the black and darkening up anywhere where necessary, adding in any patterns which I can see. So just continually refining the highlight area there. So I'm pretty happy with how that's coming along now. I'm going to blend out this just by adding some blue over the top of the black, and as we've blended it's quite easy to add this blue over here and create a nice blend out into the dark there. Just add a few strips of white where it's quite light there. And that's pretty much done for that eye. We can add a little bit of mauve here and there as well. But that's pretty much done for the outer sections of the eye, and now we can go ahead and continue with the inner sections of the eye. Okay, so turning our attention towards the inner section of the eye, what we're going to do is do the top half first, where it's nice and dark. Then we're going to go ahead and shade all of the bottom area on around here. So I'm just going to gently erase the graphite just ever so slightly for the top of the highlight there. And then what I'm going to do is fill in this area with some warm grey 5, and we're just going to gently shade over this highlight section and fill in all of the dark section there. So then once we've got that mapped out over the highlight, I'm going to go ahead and just shade it into the black above the eye there. I'm going to shade this with some brown, so I'm going to use the burnt umber, and with the burnt umber I'm going to gently come around from the iris, So from around here, and gently shade up and into the highlight there. And then we're going to shade around the highlight as well. So I'm going to start to add the pattern within the highlight that we can see. And you can see that the eye starts to take a lot more shape now as well. It's going to start to shade around here, around this right side of the highlight. It's quite dark. And we're going to shade that with the burnt umber, and we're going to follow that with the warm grey 5 just to keep the tone down. So I'm going to shade all over that of this colour. And try and keep the definition of the highlight there. This little section just up here is just a slight hint of green, so I'm just going to add a little bit of the green colour into there, and then I'm going to overlay that with the warm grey 5. Just so you get a little hint of colour showing through. So I'm going to shade over that brown at the top of the iris here with the dark indigo from the Polychromos. I'm going to gently shade over that. And then I'm going to work back over in the opposite direction for maximum coverage. And then I'm going to work over all of those layers with some walnut brown. I'm going to make sure that I start to add in the dark parts in the iris. So the darker areas. And then shade quite heavily over this area above this highlight. Blend it all together by doing a little bit of burnishing. And then what I'm going to do is use my warm grey 5, and I'm going to start to create the divides in the highlights. So I'm going to start to add all of the different shapes which I can see going on in the highlight here. So I'm using the warm grey 5 because it's a nice muted colour. It's not too dark, and we can darken it up and shade colours over the top quite easily. So if we make a mistake, we can go back over the top with some other colours. So I'm trying to create the defined shape that we can see going on the reference. So I want to get exactly the right shape. So I'm just layering some of the grey with the burnt umber just to get a nice triangular shape on the very end of that piece of that highlight. and then we've got some different tones and colours going on in here, so I'm just going to add those with the warm grey 5, and we're going to go over in a minute with some blues and everything and tone all the highlight up as necessary. So it's just paying attention to the reference photo. Just mapping out all of the shapes which we can see, adding in all the variation of tone as well. Just using really gentle marks just to blend it all together. And then we're ready to add some blues and everything over the top. So what I'm going to do is start by layering some of the light cerulean blue from the Prismacolor where it needs it. So in the bluer areas I'm going to add this all over. And the bluer areas are mainly just over the pupil there, and then as we come back out towards here they get like a green hue where they're overlapping the green bit of the eye, then they get a slightly oranger hue as they overlap the orange part of the eye. So I'm going to use some Nougat and some Bista and some light greens for this area here. So we've got a general layer down of the light cerulean blue. Then I'm going to use the genuine cobalt blue and just start to darken up and define some areas which are a little bit of a darker blue. And then we're going to use the blue violet and the dark indigo blue to add in the darkest parts. And then what we're going to do is blend over with some white to blend it all together. So I'm going to use the Prismacolor white just to blend it in. And then any areas which need a little bit more blue we can add back in over the top, and any areas which need darkening we can add in with the dark sepia. So there's a few areas which I just want to pick out with the dark sepia. Just a few darker areas which just need depicting here. And then just shading everything up as well. So making sure that we shade everything up nicely. I want it looking nice and realistic as possible. And just gently shading around, making sure that all the shapes are correct. So what we would do is exactly the same process for these ones over here, but I'm going to add those when I've added some of the colours, darker colours surrounding them. So all we need to do now is just darken up our iris and start to add some darker depth of colour. So I'm going to use an orange from the Prismacolors. I'm going to use the goldenrod, which is PC1034. I'm going to add this into the corners and the outer edge of the iris here. I'm going to make sure I go over that black as well, because I need to add some different colours over that to blend it in. But we're going to go all around the outside of this eye with this colour, and all the way up into where the highlight sits as well. Just going to make sure that we've got a nice even coverage, and add a second layer of this colour over the top. And then in some places we're going to add some really bright orange, so I'm going to use the Luminance Orange. And what we're going to do is add this in the brightest areas of the eye, which is mainly in this left corner here. So I'm going to add that. I'm just going to add a few touches here and there around the bottom of the iris where the light is catching as it filters through the eye, and just to also help blend those darker colours out there. So then what we're going to do is take our burnt sienna from the Polychromos, and we're just going to gently shade the very edges of this eye, and we're going to create some textures and things coming in towards the eye where the iris isn't completely orange all the way to the edge. You've got these little darker nodules which sit around the edge as well. And we're just making sure that everything's the correct tone just by shading some darker browns and orangey browns around the outside. We're also going to use the Sanguine to add a bit more of a russety colour over here, and make sure that all of this is shaded correctly. So we're using circular motions to try and blend all the colours together. And then as we get over here, there's some little bits within the eye which are a little bit darker, so we're going to use the Sanguine. Helps to have a nice sharp pencil for this, just to add some colour variation in there. And if we need to go darker, we can add the burnt sienna over as well. Just to add a little bit of interest to the iris, as you can see. We're going to go over and blend this out with the Zest-It as well. But it's just so we can get a nice variation of tone going on. On this corner here, this is quite grey, so we're going to use some Warm Grey 5 just to grey up the colour, just to dull it down a little. And we're also going to use some walnut brown in the corner here just to add the real dark parts. You can see that the eye is really starting to come to life now that we're adding all of these different colours down. And starting to shade up the eye properly. So I'm going to continue to add some of the burnt sienna to the very edge of the eye so it all blends in nicely. And then using the sand green to just pick out some of those little darker marks which are going on here. And then we're going to extend the goldenrod colour, gently shade it into the green. So I'm using large circular motions to blend that colour out. And then what we're going to do is use the Zest-It blender to blend this eye out, and then add any lighter marks, darker marks, like grey tones if necessary. So we're just going to get a little bit on our brush. And this will help darken some of the colours as well. I'm just going to go around the outside. Blend everything together smoothly. We're also going to blend into the green area so that we can get a nice surface to work on with the greens. Trying not to move the colour around too much. Just gently blending it. And then we can add any distinguishing marks back over the top. I'm also just going to blend the top of the eye, so this dark part as well. Blend all of this out. I'm going to extend and blend slightly into the highlight area so we get a nice painterly look about it. So then we can go back over, once it's dried for a little while, we can go back over and just add in any details, any darker shading. So I'm using Venetian Red just to gently shade in the corner of this eye. This needs darkening a little bit, so I'm going to follow that with some Walnut Brown. Darken that up so it all blends in to the edge of the eye nicely. I'm also just going to use the Venetian Red around this side. And along the bottom and outer edge of the iris there. Blend it out with some goldenrod, so the lighter colour, so blending that back over the top. And then again using the burnt sienna to add any little nodules and little distinguishing marks around the edge of the eye and in the inner section of the eye. We can start to add some texture. Anywhere which we need shading a little darker, we can use the burnt umber. So there's a nice accompaniment to the oranges to shade them up. So just gently layer some burnt umber over if you need some darker sections. So I'm just constantly going over, just checking against my reference so I've got all of the marks in accurately, all of the colour tones down nice, and we're pretty much there on the orange part, and we can move on to the green. I'm just going to add a little bit more grey into this part of the iris, just where the colour's muted a little bit more. So the green part of the eye, we've pretty much got a nice solid colour going on. I'm going to add a little bit of True Green from the Prismacolor. So I'm going to add this very lightly, again in circular motions. I'm going to make sure that I blend this out into the orange. And then I'm going to use the orange again to come back over and blend into the green so we get a really nice transition. I want a nice smooth transition, and then I'm going to use the green, not quite that harshly, to come all the way up to the pupil. And then where the pupil is, there's some orange there, so I'm going to blend some of the goldenrod over the orange. Over the green, sorry. Then we're going to darken up the bit around the pupil. So I'm going to use the burnt sienna, just gently shade around there on both sides. And I realise this has been quite a lengthy tutorial for you guys, but it's quite a nice process. And I'm using a few different materials to show you guys how I would use them. So I've just added some burnt sienna over there. Then I'm going to use some Cold Grey 4. I'm going to blend over the burnt sienna and I'm going to just burnish it down. So I've got a nice ring around the pupil there. And then with the warm grey, cold grey 4, I'm just going to create some lines coming off of that area and spread it down into the green. So we mute the green down. You can see it's getting quite muted colour. We don't really want a really bright, vibrant green. So it's muted that colour down quite nicely. And then on top of that, I'm going to add some nougat, some Polychromos nougat. I'm going to do exactly the same, just bring the nougat down in lines all the way through the green and bring it all the way coming down through towards the orange. And then to darken it up, we're going to use some walnut brown. I'm going to bring the darkest parts out. Again, we're using lines, and this is to create texture on the iris. As you can see, some quite little liney areas. And we're just trying to mute the colour of the green down as much as possible, because it's not a very striking green. So all that's left to do is just add a slight ring around the green area where it separates against the orange. So I'm going to use the warm grey 5 and I'm going to use small circular motions to just gently create an outline first where I can see the separation of the colour. I'm just using gentle strokes. So we're just continuing to add these lines using the warm grey 5 and the nougat. Sorry, the video cut out just a tiny bit at the end there. And I'm just going to shade ever so slightly down this darker section where it needs it, just there. That's pretty much the colour of the iris done. Now we just need to refine this part of the highlight, and then we're pretty much ready to call this tutorial done. As I said, it's been quite a long one, but I have used some different techniques to what I've used in the previous eye tutorials. So hopefully it's been quite useful. I've showed you how I would go about blending an eye, as well as burnishing, and I've also used the Prismacolor pencils. I can never remember the name, I always call them Polychromos. So we've just used a few different materials for this eye, which has been quite refreshing. It's quite different, and I found that the Prismacolors are actually working a lot easier on this paper. So I think this paper would be extremely useful if you primarily use Prismacolors or really soft wax-based pencils like Prismacolors, or whatever materials you prefer to use. So I'm just adding in some details, just added in a little bit of colour there where it's reflected, Then I'm going to shade over that with some cold grey and continue the cold grey over the entirety of this half of this highlight actually. And then I can use the warm grey 5, wherever it's gone, to add some shapes into the highlight here. And then dull down the colours with the grey. We can add some nougat over here to represent the orange, and then of course we can add some goldenrod in there as well to give it a bit of an orange glow because it is over the orange section. And then we just need to refine all of this dark space up here, bring it down when necessary and create a really, really dark section. And create some dark areas with the dark sepia. Just bring it down, bring this dark section down where necessary. We can also use the black to really darken it up. And try not to muddy the colours too much, so don't want to add too much black and go over too many of the colours because it will start to muddy it. And we're just going to add, try not to throw my pencils, just going to add some violets and some blues over the top of that as well to just tone it down, to help transition everything together. Just using gentle pencil strokes to bring everything together now. And I think I'm pretty much ready to call this eye done. What I would do if I wanted to is add a little bit of orange fur around the very corner here, just so it gives it that little bit of a tiger edge. But I'm going to call that it for this tutorial. Hopefully you've enjoyed this one. As I said, it has been a long one, but I have really enjoyed drawing this, and again I've enjoyed working on this paper again. It's been quite nice to work on some new paper which I'm actually liking, and working with the new materials. So I've been working with the Prismacolors and my Zestic pencil blend again, which works wonders with the Prismacolor pencils. So I will see you in the next animal eye tutorial, which will be a horse's eye, which will be up next week for you. So until then guys, have a great week and I'll speak to you later. Bye!